And here with us to discuss the issue is Chiara Sangiorgio, advisor on the topic of death penalty at Amnesty International. Good evening.
Good evening to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. So let's start from the very basics. Just how effective is death penalty in providing order and preventing crimes?
There is no evidence that the death penalty has a unique deterrent effect. What we have been highlighting throughout our work is that there is a sense of lack of security, and there is a sense of a demand from people to be protected from crime and to believe in the state institutions. And the death penalty is often used by governments to come in and give that quick solution, that quick response. And that is often associated with state control, and we see in some countries that also become, as you highlighted as well, a political tool targeting specific groups or specific minorities. So there is no evidence that death penalty would provide a solution and the safety that people demand.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, some countries did introduce the death penalty, some others abolished it. Can we take a look at some of these dynamics? What influenced such decisions, perhaps?
Yes, our figures give a narrative and portray a picture of isolation. We have, on one hand, only 16 countries last year that carried out executions, and they did so with increased determination, in our view, to pursue the death penalty. In the United States, we saw that legislation was passed to hide, for example, the source of lethal injection drugs. We saw in China, again, censorship. We saw fewer reports coming out. We saw the death penalty being used to target drug trafficking, for example. And on the other hand, we saw in countries that do not carry out executions, we saw progress. We saw steps taken to reduce the laws and the crimes for which the death penalty can be imposed. We saw in Malaysia, for example, the government abolished the mandatory death penalty and started a resentencing process involving more than 900 people. And we saw also, for example, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Liberia, tabling bills to abolish the death penalty. We are confident that the division will end and we will see the death penalty consigned to history.
Right, China looks particularly bad in your report. Why is Beijing not informing of executions?
This is a question that we ask, and I'm grateful that you're asking it too, and we should put it to the Chinese government. We keep on demanding for transparency. Figures are to date still classified as a state secret, which means, even people in China do not know how many people are executed. We see notifications not being given. The same is also for Vietnam. We had last year a family that was asked to make arrangements for the collection of the body, and only when they went to meet the authorities to make these arrangements, were told that the execution had already been carried out. We see extreme cruelty being hidden behind the secrecy that the authorities use to conceal and to pursue the determination for the death penalty.
We've already mentioned the Baluchi ethnic minority in Iran. And I wanted to ask you about South Korea, because South Korea has introduced death penalty recently, right? It is for killing, I believe, or abandoning an infant, if I'm not mistaken. And South Korea has the lowest birth rate in years. I mean, it has been a real problem in the country. So, just putting these two together, I was wondering if death penalty is being used as a political tool, and do we have any more examples of such a behavior?
We certainly believe that the death penalty comes in as part of political narratives. So as you mentioned, in Iran, you mentioned the Baluchi ethnicity, but we also see in, for example, the death penalty being used to punish protesters. We had 7 cases last year of people that were convicted for their involvement in protests in 2022 and previously. South Korea is a good example. We saw the death penalty be invoked in election campaigns. That was in the United States, in Florida, as well it was in Taiwan earlier this year. So there is this narrative of the death penalty being associated with a quick magic solution that can come in and fix the problem and appease the people. However, we feel that it is important to do what you are doing right now, which is to keep on informing about how the death penalty is used and about the lack of effectiveness of the death penalty as a crime deterrence tool, and try to move the conversation forward and see what actually can work and how we can actually protect people better.
As I mentioned in the beginning, and citing, of course, your report, some 28,000 people around the world have already been sentenced and now await the death penalty. You know, sometimes they wait for long, long years. They never know the day. Isn't that a sort of, is it a form of a torture?
We, as Amnesty International, believe that the death penalty is the ultimate cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. From the time a death sentence is imposed, that thought and that anxiety of the execution can never be removed on the person on death row, but also on their families. Just to give you an example, like now we are looking at Japan and a retrial of a man who had been under sentence of death for more than 40 years. 40 years on death row, and in Japan, there is no prior announcement of the executions. So the people on death row in Japan every day wake up wondering if the steps that they're hearing in the corridor, is it because somebody's coming to take them to their execution moment, to their execution. These are just one of the many examples. And the gentleman that I am describing, Mr. Iwawa Kamada, has developed a severe mental disability while he was on death row. And even to date, while the retrial is ongoing, he is really lacking awareness of what's happening. Just an example, and a drop in the oceans of the many examples that we can have on the death penalty and its cruelty.
And I just, at the very end, wanted to take a closer look at the US, because it's one of the few Western countries that still have death penalty in place. Why is it so? I mean, why are they still using it? And of course, is it effective? I mean, we know that it's not particularly effective, but if you could shed some light on this, that would be great.
Absolutely. So the picture that we are seeing in the United States reflects very much the message of isolation that I described earlier for the global world. We saw last year executions increasing, but at the same time we saw that they were confined to 5 states. We still have Texas hanging on to the death penalty, kind of remaining the state with the highest number of executions. We saw Florida jumping in with the first executions in 2019. And very worryingly, we saw, for example, Alabama introducing a new, very cruel and untested method of execution by gas asphyxiation. So again, we see this picture of a few states, particularly states in the South, hanging on to the death penalty, and then the rest of the country being either executions-free or already having abolished the death penalty. We renew our call to President Biden to move quickly on his promise that he made during the electoral campaign last time to abolish the death penalty and try to do so as quickly as possible.
Right, but I mean, just a quick follow-up. This nitrogen asphyxiation, right? That was the one in Alabama. Why such cruel methods? I mean, what is it supposed to serve? What kind of purpose?
We believe no purpose, but essentially the authorities found, after litigation of many years, found that there was a quicker way for them to move forward with some of the execution by introducing this other method of execution. And there's been a lot of uproar, the cruelty in particular of a method of execution that's been found by international human rights body to be cruel and to amount to torture. And yet, on the other hand, we saw the authorities proceeding with strong determination and not listening to the concerns and somehow moving back. We oppose any execution and any method of execution, but there is no doubt that the chilling display of sheer intention to carry out the execution shown by the authorities of Alabama was quite abhorrent and to be condemned.
Right. So to conclude, let me just add that it doesn't look good for the US, for this champion of democracy and human rights around the world, that it's in the same league with China, Iran, Saudi Arabia and Somalia. That's just to end our interview. Chiara Sangiorgio, advisor on the topic of death penalty at Amnesty International, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.